Hello, friends. Good to meet with you today. And I'm going to present to you on contemporary choral and orchestral music of Sri Lanka. What do you mean by contemporary music? I'm referring to the period from about the 1950s all the way up to today, a period of about 70 years. And by choral and orchestral music, I mean music that has been written for choir, consisting of different voices, and orchestra, and this means a full orchestra consisting of strings, violins, violas, cellos, double basses, woodwinds, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and all of the brass, horns, trumpets, trombones, tuba, and percussion, timpanis, triangles, cymbals, the whole works. And a big orchestra is anything from 50 to 150 members strong, and a big choir can be anything from 25 to 75 strong performers. We must distinguish an orchestra from a band. A band, of course, is the three guitars that you have in a band, maybe an organ, a drum set, of course, and a singer, perhaps. And these are small groups that perform at weddings and so on. That's not an orchestra, that's a band. An orchestra is a full, big group of usually professional or amateur players. Now, I also want to emphasize that much of Sri Lankan music consists of songs. That is, words set to music with some accompaniment, maybe a few instruments accompanying a singer. And a song is a very important part of music, but it is not the only part of music. There is instrumental tradition of music, which consists of solo performances and orchestras. And whether you look at Indian music or Western music, there is a wide range of choral, solo singing, solo instruments, and orchestral or combined ensemble performances, a strong instrumental tradition. So from the Ragadhari side of India comes people like Pandit Ravi Shankar, Pandit Harish Prasad Chaurasia, Bismillah Khan. These are great solo instrumentalists, and also singers like Lata Mangeshkar. On the west, you have singers like Pavarotti, Joan Sutherland, Jesse Norman, and so on. And then, of course, great musicians and violinists like Ishtaq Perlaman. And other performers like James Galway playing the flute and so on. And then great orchestras like the Berlin Philharmonic, the New York Philharmonic, the Tokyo Philharmonic, even in Asia, the Beijing Philharmonic, the Symphony, the Singapore Symphony. And in Sri Lanka, we have four orchestras: the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka, the Gustav Mahler Society Orchestra, the Krishna Ensemble, and the Colombo Chamber Music Society's orchestra, led by Lakshman Joseph, Krishna led by Ananda Dabare, the Symphony Orchestra conducted by Dushyant Perera, and the Gustav Mahler Orchestra conducted by Sri Malvira Singh. There are also orchestras in India. So, for example, in Mumbai, you have the Bombay Chamber Orchestra, and in Delhi, you have the Indian Symphony and the Philharmonic. So you have a wide range of these orchestras around the world. Unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, most items that you hear on TV and radio are 99% songs, and of these 99% of songs, 99% are love songs, very few about other important social things. So this is a very narrow band, and as a result, Sri Lankan audiences are not used to hearing choral and orchestral music. But this is a tradition that is developing, and we need to focus on it, improve it, encourage it, listen to it, and appreciate it. One of the founding fathers of this new tradition of choral and orchestral music in Sri Lanka is Maestro Dr. Sri Khemadasa. Sri Khemadasa was born in the villages. He's a self-taught musician and composer. He learned a little bit of Western music. He learned and then went off. He was a believer in the communist and social ideologies as a political philosophy. He joined those, I believe, was part of those parties. He went to the Soviet Union. He went to some of the Baltic states, went to the conservatoires, studied there, and enjoyed and appreciated music there. And he was somebody who was rooted in the folk music of Sri Lanka. He believed in using that folk music, the music he heard as a child and as a youth. But then he also drew from Western and Eastern music, from Indian music, and he enriched his musical compositions with these other traditions, and therefore founded a new vision apart from this traditional Ragadhari-based music, with drums and so on, and getting away and building a tradition rooted in that, but expanding the horizons. So This is where I want to start, and I will introduce a number of other young composers to you, including some of my own music as we proceed. Later, he was granted an honorary doctorate, I believe, by the Ruhuna University, just a little bit before he died. Unfortunately, he died of chronic kidney disease. He had a kidney failure. Someone actually donated a kidney to him and one of his fans. And later, they did transplant a kidney, but I don't think he lived very much long after that. He leaves behind two daughters, the older of whom is actually also a composer and a musician. They're both musicians. The younger one is a cellist, and they have established together with their mother and other followers the Khemadasa Foundation, which tries to promote and perpetuate his music. I want to start today by playing to you his music, which he wrote for the Golu Hadawatha film by Lester James, directed by Lester James Pearce. Golu Hadawatha is a story about unexpressed love. And it was one of those films that was a landmark in the film history of Sri Lanka. And Khemadasa wrote the music for this. And you see immediately his style of orchestral writing. He uses the local batanalava or the flute. He uses sitars, but he also uses a string orchestra, including xylophone. So he's bringing in some Western instruments, but he creates a style of his own, which went with him throughout his life, but on which he built from time to time quite a lot. So let's listen to the about 2 or 3 minutes of music from the Golu Hadawatha film by Khemadasa. Maestro Khemadasa went on to write a whole bunch of orchestral music. Amongst them, he wrote several symphonies, starting with the New Year Symphony. Unfortunately, there isn't a recording of the symphony online on the internet. And his last symphony, called The Mother of My Times, was written and dedicated to his mother. And his mother was to actually be the chief guest at the premiere performance of this work in Colombo. Unfortunately, she died just before then, and it was one of those moments in Khemadasa's life that was heartbreaking for him. So between these two symphonies, there are also lots of other orchestral music and incidental music he wrote for plays. I myself have played in a play, a translation of The Merchant of Venice with Tony Ranasinghe and others acting. That's actually how I came to know Khemadasa first. And I got to know him very well. We used to have lots of dialogue and interesting discussions on TV and off TV and privately. But he and I, we became very good and close friends, actually. And so today I also want to turn very quickly to some of his choral music. He was intensely a Buddhist person, believer, and he wrote what I consider to be again a landmark in Sri Lankan music, the first Buddhist cantata or the first Buddhist oratorio. An oratorio is something that tells a story, but with music written for orchestra and choir and solo singers. And great composers like Handel wrote oratorios, Mendelssohn wrote oratorios, And these are big works that are meant to be performed on stage. So this work which he wrote, the first Buddhist oratorio called the Pirinivan Mangalya, the death of the Buddha, is actually depicted in a series of poems. The way in which his disciples attended to him and the way in which he gracefully passed away and to achieve nirvana. So he took this poetry and set it to music for choir and orchestra, and also solo singers, and it's a beautiful work. I want you to now listen to an excerpt from this work. I personally think this is really beautiful music. And here's another excerpt from it. But here you will see suddenly he begins to use some of that folk music of Sri Lanka in a somewhat lighter section of this Buddhist oratory, the Piriniman Mangalya. The Pirinivan Mangalya. Do have a listen to that whole work. It's available on the internet, and it's a brilliant piece of music. When Khemadasa was alive, he had a number of students, and he taught them music. He had students coming from all over the countryside, from the villages, outstation villages. And he would train them from scratch, teaching them how to sing, how to project their voices in an audience. He taught them how to perform instruments and so on. And he bred a group of young musicians and indeed even composers, imprinting on their minds his vision of a Sri Lankan musical tradition. And one of these young, youthful composers who actually came from that group that he influenced was Don Dinesh Subasinghe. Now, Don Dinesh Subasinghe has become quite well known in Sri Lanka for a TV show that he has on a regular basis. And he is somebody who collects instruments, of traditional instruments as he travels. He learns to play these instruments and he brings it into his music through this TV show. He has somewhat diversified in recent times to performing somewhat lighter music. But in his early trainings, he was actually trained in the traditional way in India. But he has, of course, been influenced by Khemadasa. And I want to play to you very quickly 2 excerpts from his Buddhist oratorio. And there he brings in a lot of folk music, the way you recite language, etc., drawing from it. And depicting various aspects of the life of the Buddha and his struggles to achieve nirvana. Here's one excerpt from it. And finally, before we part from Khemadasa and his strong foundational tradition, I want to play you an excerpt from one of his operas. His last opera, called Agni, was written at the end of his 40-year musical career, and just before he was conferred his honorary degree, doctorate, at the University of Ruhuna. Agni is an opera plot based partly with the strong Greek influence. You see Prometheus, the god of fire, and then you also see the Sri Lankan Oriental tradition from the goddess of fire, the Patini goddess coming in, and he combined this into a little story in which the scene is set in wintry times, and then the god of fire bequeaths fire to the earth in the form of the sun, in the form of fire. And this brings about a transformation in civilization, in the growth of the human societies. And but in the end, we are not that respectful either of the sun or of fire, or of these natural phenomena. So it's an interesting opera, and there is this one aria or solo that is there in the opera called Shreya, in which the goddess of fire introduces herself. And I very much wanted to perform this aria Shreya when I had the opportunity to work with the Sun Symphony Orchestra in Vietnam. It's a professional orchestra and conducted by a French conductor. And so I then asked the Khemadasa Foundation for the score, which his daughters helped me to got somebody to actually write out, sent to me, and then I reorchestrated this music for a full symphony orchestra. And we had one of our leading singers who now lives and works in New York, Taranga Gunatilaka, sing this together with the conductor of the Sun Symphony Orchestra, Maestro Ochnin, who conducted this performance. now turn to some of my own music. I started writing music when I was very young. I must have been about 10 or 11 years old when I started scribbling my own little notes. I was taking piano lessons at that time. My father was very musical, and so was my paternal grandfather, who was a violinist. My father was quite a musician, played a number of different instruments, sang, and that's where I get my sister and I. We both get our musical genes. But to come back to my own music, I started composing at a very early age, learnt the Western traditional music, harmony, composition, etc. I had a very good teacher, Shamini Rasaratnam. And afterwards, when I was just 17 years old, I wrote my first big orchestral and choral work. It was a Christmas oratory, the story of the Nativity. And it was written for a very big orchestra and very big choir with a soloist. And it was performed for the first time by the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka, and Dr. Earl de Fonseca conducted it. He repeated it a couple of times after that because he really loved the piece of music. The words were written by the famous Father Marcelin Jayakody, who is well known for writing hymns and even other songs, and won the Magsaysay Award for Literature, which is like the Asian Nobel Prize. And I remember meeting with Father Marcelin Jayakody to ask him to write the music, and he was very inspired and wrote a really beautiful libretto. A libretto is a set of words that you use in oratory or opera. Now, this was written when I was 17 years old in 1974, and it's interesting, it was written very much before Khemadasa's Pirinvan Mangalde Oratorio. And so in many ways, this is the very first oratorio, Sri Lankan oratorio in Sinhala ever written. And I want to play you some excerpts. I revised the score and more recently performed it in 2019, December, just before COVID, at St. Paul's Church in Kinsey Road. I conducted this performance, and it was performed with the Octave Choir, led by Niranjan de Silva, and the Gustav Mahler Society Orchestra, which I conducted, had the privilege of conducting. And it was a full church, and we made a recording of it, and I will play you now some excerpts. The piece opens with a trumpet call, which and an overture, which kind of sets the scene for the Nativity, with the Roman emperor calling for the census to be taken, and all the people going to their villages to be counted, and Mother Mary seated on a donkey and led by Joseph. She's pregnant with Jesus, and they go through this great mountainside valleys to Bethlehem, and there she gives birth. And at the end of this piece, you actually hear Doi Doi, which is a famous lullaby. It's almost like Mary singing a little lullaby to the born Jesus. So this is entirely instrumental, and I'll just play you some excerpts. Now begins the part in which the choir joins the orchestra and introduces the scenery in which the shepherds are watching over their flock by night. So let's play a very short clip of that, followed by suddenly then there's a big commotion and a light, and the angels appear to the shepherds. They are really frightened, and the angel announces to them the birth of Jesus. These two things are two separate choruses. I will play these two clips one after the other. Thank you. I hope you noticed the drama of that, the appearance of the angels suddenly and the frightened shepherds with the brass, the trumpets, the trombones, the horns blaring out a repeated note pattern and creating that excitement. This is then followed by the angel, sung here by a soprano, Rachel Halliday, one of our leading soprano singers in Sri Lanka, telling the shepherds, please don't be afraid. I'm actually here to give you some really good news. There is born in the city of David Jesus Christ, and please do go visit with him. It's a great privilege for you to go see him. So calming the shepherds down, and that is sung by Rachel Halliday here. This excerpt will be immediately followed by another one, which is a prediction from Isaiah, many hundred years, 1,000 years before Jesus was born, saying, now one day there will be a son born to us. His name will be the Prince of Peace. His name will be called Wonderful. Apataputek ipaduneya, pudumayayanu ohugenamaya, sama kumaru kiyavini, sama kumaru kiyavini. And it's sung by a children's choir, joined by the rest of the orchestra and choir, the children's choir singing from the balcony. And this is then followed by the final chorus, which is the Amen. And in this chorus, I actually use the Gajaga Wannama theme, which is a traditional theme for dancing in the Kandi Perahera and so on. I took that theme and used it for choir orchestra to sing the Amen chorus and built upon it. And so I'm going to play these three excerpts, the angels' announcement to the shepherds, followed by the Isaiah announcement, unto us a child is born, and then the Amen chorus, and they will go one after the other. Thank you. also written a number of other compositions. There isn't really enough time to play all of this, but I will play you a small excerpt from a concerto that I wrote for sitar and orchestra. I wrote this in particular for our virtuoso sitar player, Pradeep Ratnayake, a professor at the University of Sri Jayawardhanapura Kotte. He's a professor of music, and he's a virtuoso sitar player. I wrote this piece for him, and it was being performed many times now by the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka, by the Bombay Chamber Orchestra, and also by an orchestra in Bangalore. And we have a short recording of it, which you can hear. A concerto is a piece written for a solo instrument with an orchestra, in which they dialogue with each other, but the solo instrument is able to show off some of its virtuosic qualities. I used some ragas in this, the Kaushik Dwani raga and the Malkosh raga, and used tablas and gatams as part of the orchestra. So you will hear some of that as well. I also wrote some dance music for the orchestra called Three Sri Lankan Dances. The first of these is based on a Vandama, which depicts the flight of an eagle, the Ukusu Vandama. And you see the eagle soaring beautifully, and then suddenly it flaps its wings and hovers over something, and then it soars again. And so we'll play an excerpt of that. This is then followed by another piece called Jaya Kelly, which is essentially music from a little bit of the Perahera, but also from New Year celebrations. And then finally, a baila. The third dance is actually a baila, which is, as you know, it's one of the things we all dance at the end of a party, a wedding, when we are a little high on a drink. People ask me, why did you write for a baila? Because this is like music which everybody sings. And I said, people like Brahms and Liszt brought the Hungarian dances to the orchestras. Liszt brought the Hungarian dances as well. Dvorak brought the Slavonic dances, which were danced by gypsies and people on the streets. And so there's really a long tradition of composers bringing common dance forms into the concert halls for orchestra to perform. So we'll play these excerpts one after the other, so you can hear these three Sri Lankan dances. It's performed by the Symphony Orchestra of Sri Lanka, which I conducted. I hope you enjoyed that, Baila. And you might have noticed the Rosa Pollagain Balla Maranda in that piece. But I also use another lesser known Cafrinya piece called Singalinona, 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 da 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 dee dum dum, and so on, as part of the Baila. As you know, Baila is founded upon Cafrinya. My last piece of music I want to play a short excerpt to you from is a work called an overture. And this overture is an overture is a freestanding piece of music which is usually played at the beginning of a concert or the beginning of an opera or ballet to introduce the rest of the music to you. This short overture, it's about 7 minutes long. I'm not going to play all of it. I'm just going to play an excerpt of it. And this is a performance that I conducted with the Vietnamese Sun Symphony Orchestra. It's a professional orchestra. And the piece is dedicated to my eldest daughter, whom I told you was a dancer. And and it is actually called The Dancers, and is based a lot on Sri Lankan rhythms and so on. I've been obsessed with capturing Sri Lankan drum rhythms into my music. So let's listen to an excerpt from this overture. And I want to very quickly turn to introducing you to three other composers, young composers. One of them is Harsha Makalanda, who was trained as a Western musician, but actually has become very popular as a jazz musician and pianist. He's a composer as well, and has written a few works for the orchestra. One of them, which is fairly well known now, is called the Swara Sangha Vannama, in which he draws on folk music, on temple music, and on jazz, and writes for an orchestra this piece for piano, Sri Lankan drums, gatabera and tammatang and so on, and orchestra. And here are three short excerpts. I will play them one after the other in the order in which they appear. And you will hear the introduction, you will hear a little bit of the middle of the piece, and then towards the end of the piece, and you will hear some improvisations going on between piano and drums. And Harsha Makalanda is also written a lot of music for films. And so he's one of our young modern composers. And I hope, and this is available on the internet, so you can listen to the whole piece. So here are three excerpts from his Swara Sangha Vannama. I hope you enjoyed that. Another composer whom I would like to introduce to you is Professor Pradeep Ratnayake, whom I referred to earlier. Is a professor of music at the University of Sri Lankan. He is an excellent virtuoso sitar player, but also has been to the University of Columbia, where he studied music, and has performed a lot of what we might refer to as fusion music, combining the ragadhari music that he knows with jazz. And also he's also a composer, written for pieces for sitar and orchestra. And one of these is called the Queenie Concerto. And we have time only to listen to a very short excerpt of it. But here is a performance with a German orchestra. And this piece, Queenie, is written actually for solo sitar and solo cello. And you see here Pradeep and his colleague, who's a cellist, performing with this orchestra in Germany. We'll play a short clip of it. There are 3 or 4 movements, and you can go on the net and listen to the full work. It's a beautiful work, and I would recommend that you do so. I now want to turn to another young composer. He's really a young up-and-coming composer. He writes a lot in the kind of Western classical tradition, but is beginning to find his own style of composition. He is, very young. And that's Lakshan Perera. And one of the pieces he wrote was a full-length mass for orchestra and choir. And this mass has now been sanctioned by the Sri Lanka's Catholic Church as appropriate for use in church. And here it is performed by the Gustav Mahler Society Orchestra, and it's conducted by its chief conductor, Sri Malvira Singha. And you will hear this excerpt from his Mass by Lakshan Perera. That is actually the Gloria from, or the Glory to God in the highest, the part of the Mass from Lakshan Perera's Missa Grandis. It's called a Grand Mass, the Missa Grandis. I now want to, my final young composer I want to talk to you about is Sachiththa Fernando. Sachiththa Fernando is actually a young graduate of the University of Colombo, and he's very interested in writing film music, and he is developing his own style. He is the leader of the violinist, excellent violinist. He's the leader of the Gustav Mahler Society Orchestra, and is also the leader of the National Youth Orchestra, which is under the auspices of the Ministry of Education. Now, Sachiththa has written a number of works. And in particular, he's made some really interesting arrangement. One of them is of the famous song Ukuletanavat, and he's written this for piano and orchestra. And here I want to play you some excerpts. I'll play you the melody of Ukuletanavat so you can hear it, and then his improvisations for orchestra after that. And I'll play these two clips one after the other, and then I'll talk to you again. And now to my final excerpt from this young Sachiththa Fernando, young composer's music. And this is an original piece. It's a fanfare. And to my mind, it sounds a lot like, the famous film composers, the writers of Star Wars, or people like Adams and others who write film music for Hollywood. There's a lot of that kind of sound in this, but he's really truly one of our he together with Lakshan Perera, two young composers who are really up and coming, and I would keep an eye on them, and they need to be encouraged. So here's his fanfare by Sachiththa Fernando, played by the Gustav Mahler Symphony, conducted by Sri Malveera Singha. Well, friends, this brings me to the end of my presentation, and I hope you enjoyed that fanfare. I'm Sachiththa Fernando. So I have covered a fairly long history of almost about 50, 60, 70 years, starting with the Maestro Khemadasa, who we see as the father of this new movement for choral and orchestral music, contemporary music in Sri Lanka. And I hope you realize that there is a growing body of orchestral and choral music in Sri Lanka. I would encourage you, please, to listen to this. Some of this is available online, some of them on CDs, which you may have to purchase. But there is this tradition. You should talk about it. You should attune your minds and ears to this new music, encourage it, demand it from your TV stations and radios, and begin to appreciate the growth of a completely new genre of music in Sri Lanka, which is novel, which is refreshing, different to the typical songs that you hear, and expands the musical mind into horizons yet unexplored in Sri Lanka. So with that, let me stop this presentation and wish you all well. Do keep safe.